This is your host, Gabriel Buelna with BuelnaNews. Welcome back, viewers. So today we have an interview that we did with a few weeks back with Abelardo de la Pena Jr., who is with Plaza de Arte Cultura in downtown Los Angeles at Placita Alvera. And we also have Dan Gold from the Jewish American Federation. But before we get to these interviews and talk about what we're going to be discussing, I want you to go down right there where you have the subscribe button. Do us a favor, subscribe. You've heard interviews that we did with Chueco from De California, having the discussion about race, class issues, Chicanos, Mexican Americans. Then we had an interview with Antonio Gallo with regard to tenant issues here in California. Even if you're not in California, it's going to be important, at least for you to understand kind of what's going on. So we're happy to do those interviews. So press the subscribe button, share the interviews on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You know, we'd greatly appreciate it, and press the little thumbs up button. It works for us. In the conversation today with Abelardo de la Pena Jr. and Dan Gold, the conversation is as we've kind of all been going through this together with COVID, and as we were dealing with the vaccines, the distribution of the vaccines, issues related to inequality of how that's going, but we're also having a discussion about culture and what does it mean during the pandemic that we've all had to spend additional time together. Are we cooking differently? Are we interacting? Are we speaking with our kids differently? So, normally, we're looking at this, or a lot of my conversations more from a political perspective, but here I'm looking at it from the social work side of my brain and how we can build those relationships so that after the pandemic, we can say, look, it was tough. There was a lot of suffering, and let's acknowledge that. But at least there's some cultural capital that we built. So for the hour, Abelardo de la Pena Jr. and Dan Gold, let's get to it. At We the Gente, we explore the diverse groups of our listener area, Los Angeles, and try and ask pertinent questions and hopefully guide further discussion and maybe help with some best practices or solutions on different topics. Your feedback for the show is going to be very important to us in the process. Please email comments or questions or show suggestions to gabriel@wethegente.com. So for today, we're going to have the first part of a two-part series called Culture During COVID. And we're going to try and explore through the topic how culture, and in Los Angeles, we have diverse cultures. But we're going to start off with part one with Abelardo de la Pena Jr. Abelardo is with La Plaza de Arte Cultura, which is a nonprofit organization by Olvera Street focusing on Mexican, Chicano, and Latino cultures within Los Angeles. And we'll be having a discussion about how La Plaza is working through evolving culture and cooking. Next, we have a conversation with Dan Gold of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. And we're going to have a discussion about the diverse Jewish communities here in Los Angeles and in Israel. And Dan will be going through that exploration and what it means as a leader and in building a culture and how COVID is developing that. So for the hour, we have Abelardo de la Pena Jr. and we have Dan Gold.
It's a tradition for all Mexican families.
Ricardo Gonzalez says Christmas at his home is usually packed with up to 50 people making tamales. And this year,
Yes, my close family. It will be probably 4 of us. We have big families. We always get together, share gifts and all that. It's going to be different, but, we're glad that we are alive.
but since the CDC is recommending against large gatherings this holiday to prevent the spread of coronavirus, tamale sales are suffering.
Every day things are changing. Every day something new is happening. And we just kind of have to figure things out as it goes. People are kind of holding off a little bit with the orders. I think they're trying to figure out what they're going to do, if they're going to be able to get together with the family, if people are sick. So just different things that are happening that are kind of maybe holding people back a little bit.
We're here today with Abelardo de la Peña. Abelardo has been involved in Chicano Latino politics culture for decades. Currently, Abelardo is Director of Marketing and Communications, and he also operates the LatinoLA.com website. I met Abelardo when I was a graduate student at Claremont Graduate University in Political Science and Economics, and Abelardo and Claremont had just started a program in IT, business and marketing in the late 90s. And, there was a flyer for an event for the start of Latino LA, and which is still on, which I still like posting, and I encourage folks to visit LatinoLA.com. But he also had a vision of Latino San Diego, Latino San Francisco, Latino San Antonio. Abelardo, can you tell us a bit about your trajectory in kind of Chicano history and where you find yourself today? Then we'll get into La Plaza.
Of course. Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you, Gabriel, for this conversation. I look forward to it. And it's Abelardo de la Peña Jr. That's my father. He's senior and director of marketing and communications, La Plaza de Cultura y Arte, located downtown LA. And
your trajectory from creating Latino LA, most people, currently forget that in the 90s, if you were Mexican American, Latino in California, it was a difficult decade. Prop 187, Prop 227, anti-immigration, anti-bilingual education, anti-affirmative action. A lot of it was targeted towards the Mexican Latino populations. And in the middle of that, you create LatinoLA.com. And to me, it's fascinating because now you're director of marketing and communications for La Plaza, and I think listeners would find it intriguing how that went for you.
Sure. Yes, the intent of Latino LA was and continues to be to serve as a means of communication and self-expression for Latinos, Chicanos, Mexican Americans on the internet. It's to allow in the English language, and that's primary, because at the time there was multiple, and there still are multiple communications outlets, both print, radio, internet. Though at the time the internet was still just blossoming, but it was primarily in Spanish because people assumed the Latinos, we speak Spanish and we want our media in Spanish, and that's what the advertisers, the marketers, and so on that their studies showed and all that. But I knew from personal experience that I am a Spanish speaker. I do consume some media in Spanish, but my primary language is English, and that's the world I live in. And so to be able to put out information, communication, stories, commentary in English to an English-speaking Latino audience who was interested in these issues, as you said, the political issues, the social issues, the entertainment issues, and so on, was the goal, and we succeeded. It was at the time at the founding a lot of, and as I said, it was user generated. It was just a couple guys learning to work the internet, getting a domain. Putting it out there, and people would contribute their events, their stories on community, on politics, on arts and entertainment, and another. And the intent was to, first of all, create this or have this Latino LA, which of course focused on the Los Angeles region, but then create these websites in other Latino cities. Like you say, San Diego, Latino San Francisco. And we were, in fact, on the way to some major funding, because, of course, you need funding for these types of ventures. But then the bottom fell out in the internet. That was during the time that the technology boom it boomed, and then it exploded. And we were caught up in that explosion, and people's interest went away.
KPFK Los Angeles 90.7. We're speaking today with Abelardo de la Peña Jr., Director of Marketing and Communications for La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. Abelardo, so it was interesting during the 90s, because I could say this show, the We the Gente show on KPFK, is probably derivative of your early work. So I want to give you props, along with some other folks, Mario Araujo from Aztecanet and some others as well. Let's get into very quickly the mission of La Plaza. So La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, recognizing the enduring cultural influence of Mexicans, Mexican Americans, and all Latinos and Latinas in Los Angeles through transformative exhibitions, programming, and educational experiences. And that's important for the listeners to hear. But your mission mentions transformative exhibitions, programming, and educational experiences. During this time of social distancing and Zoom, everything, has Plaza adapted to make your exhibits transformative for your audience? And what's been some of your experiences with that?
Sure. We, of course, as a museum, have these exhibitions. We have 3 permanent exhibitions that are there at La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. Then we have at least 1 to 2, and sometimes 3 temporary exhibitions, which are mounted for a number of months and then replaced by others. And they range. And if those of you who are familiar with La Plaza de Cultura y Artes, their art, history, social, we tackle social issues, and on our exhibition walls through art, through photography, through text, through images, and so on, and even interactive video. By transformative, a person that comes to La Plaza, say when we were open and when we will open again, they'll learn because more than likely they haven't, they'll learn about braceros. They'll learn about the Chicano movimiento. They'll learn about redlining and how it affected, the Latinos. And our temporary exhibitions, one that we mounted we opened just 3 weeks before the pandemic, temporarily closed La Plaza. It was called Afro Latinidad, Mi Casa, My City, which is the first exhibition in a major institution which focuses on the Afro-Latino community, both historically, culturally, socially, through arts and entertainment. And that's something that, we can say proudly that we gathered an advisory committee with prominent Afro-Latinos in the community. And so we were able to mount this on our walls, but since we had to close down, now we're able to bring that exhibition to the community via the internet, via our website, as a 360-degree walking tour, in that a person on a smartphone, on a computer, on a pad, can basically tour the exhibit. They can walk through by pointing their cursor to dots, zooming in, swiveling the view, closing in on the artwork or the photography, read the text in either English or Spanish, click on a video that's included, that's part of the exhibit, and in that way they'll learn and really get better acquainted with our Afro-Latino community.
So specifically, since the pandemic and since the shutdown orders here in Los Angeles, La Plaza has moved many of its exhibits online. So folks watching right now, and again, what's the website for La Plaza?
La Plaza's website is lapca.org.
Thank you.
Right. So far, we've done 2 of our exhibits, our 2 temporary exhibits that are on the walls right now, which is Afro Latinidad, Mi Casa, My City, and Carlos Almaraz, Evolution of Form. Carlos Almaraz, of course, very well known as the pioneer of Chicano art. That exhibit was scheduled to open the week of the shutdown, that we shut down. So, first of all, it was curated by Susana Smith Bautista, and then also with assistance by Elsa Flores Almaraz, who's Carlos Almaraz's wife. And she was here, she lives in Hawaii, so she was here already in LA, so we decided to actually do a live walkthrough in which we used a camera, a video camera, and did a virtual walkthrough that we streamed it on our Facebook site, so that people could actually walk through live and see this exhibition for the first time. That, in turn, was recorded, and that's on our website as well, a recording of the walkthrough, along with another edited walkthrough with just Elsa Flores talking about personal remembrances with her husband. So yeah, these are the two that have been filmed or processed through this 3D technology, and that we currently have on the website, with plans in the next few weeks to get our larger exhibits, our permanent exhibits, which would take more time and which we'll plan on doing soon.
KPFK Los Angeles 90.7. We're speaking today with Abelardo de la Peña Jr., Director of Marketing and Communications for La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. So Abelardo, with the 8 minutes that we have, I want to talk about culture, Mexican culture, Chicano culture, Mexican American culture, and other Latino cultures with regard to cooking and also some cultural freedom. So, you're Chicano here from. Did you grow up here in Los Angeles?
Yes, I did. I grew up in the Wilmington area.
Oh, excellent. So, in growing up in Los Angeles, being Chicano, being Mexican American, one thing that was for sure is that there wasn't much Mexican American or generally Latino culturally occurring in the wider audience in Los Angeles. We always had our Chicano studies departments, we always had our neighborhoods, and we always had our taquerias. But you've seen recently a growth of Mexican American, Central American, and of culture citywide. And I've experienced that this generation has more cultural freedom as Mexican Americans than just 20, 30 years ago. Do you agree? What was your experience?
Yeah, for one, there is, there's more of us here. That's one. And also, I see the younger generation, I'd say, the 20, 30, 40-year-old, they grew up involved already with proud of their heritage, proud of their food. For a lot of people in my generation, I'm in my 60s, and the baby boomer generation, many of them still had the fallout of the prior generation, in which it wasn't not encouraged to promote your culture, or to even assimilation was still the primary word, to assimilate into the mainstream culture. Push away your Spanish, push away your homebound traditions. But I think part of what Latino LA was about, and what La Plaza is about, is celebrating culture, celebrating your traditions, your art, your history, your culture. And that's what we do. And food is integral to that. Before Mexican food, and this has been written about by others, Gustavo Arellano and others, Mexican food was tacos, enchiladas, greasy, cheesy. But we know that that's not the case. There's such a wide variety of food and of regional styles of cooking, of ingredients, and so on. Many dating back millennia with the ancestors. Food developed by our ancestors. La Plaza is from its beginning has celebrated and presented cuisine as a way of learning, as a way of learning culture, as a way of really, just showing that our menu is vast and it can transform your life.
So during the pandemic, right? Growing up in LA, you're right. It's interesting for I was going to say viewers, for listeners. There has been an ebb and flow kind of since 1848, since the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, since this was Mexico, of the Mexican population and how we've been allowed to identify ourselves and the movement for that. And it was interesting growing up in LA, making tamales during Christmas time. As a young Mexican American, I have to say, I didn't like it. I didn't appreciate it. I thought, could we have something else that was less Mexican? Because to a certain extent, I think we are brought up in LA in the general culture, to look down at anything that is Mexican. But now, being older into my 20s, 30s, and now at 48, I've had that appreciation. And what I've noticed is that Mexican food has been elevated. Not that it wasn't elevated and had that quality, but the number of gourmet Mexican restaurants, as many taco stands on the streets of LA weren't around, when I was growing up. So during the time of the pandemic and coronavirus, right? So as individuals at home, I've noticed that La Plaza has a lot of cooking classes that have been able to really, again, transcend culture. How is culture important for those in their home, let's say making tamales? Why are those traditions important for folks to transmit that culture in their household, especially right now when folks are alone?
Sure. It keeps you, for one, cooking keeps you connected to your culture. I see it that way. In my family, the tamales, of course, traditional in Christmas, but then a wealth of other foods. We grew up, very low income, so patas de puerco, the lenguas, and mole, things like that. What we do with our cooking demonstrations, and these are with a variety of cooks, of restaurant owners, of chefs, of even food historians. We talk about not just the food itself, but where it came from, in order to give people that experience of first of all, if something they've never heard of, or something that they've heard of and they want to learn how to make. So we do that demonstration. It's in the form of a conversation. The cook is in their home, zooming in from the restaurant in downtown LA to Mexico City. We've had a baker in Mexico City. We've had a chef in Colorado zooming in. John Rivera Sedler from New Mexico. So and because we've heard about it in the pandemic, everybody bakes sourdough bread. But there's more to that, more to what people can make, and the variety of Mexican food that we've presented has been amazing. I've learned about enmoladas. I've learned about enfrijoladas, simple things that people could make with the ingredients they have at home, or they could venture out to places that we've talked about, Vallarta Market, Northgate Market. Myself, personally, the local supermarkets have been okay. But then through the pandemic, through this program, I've learned about Vallarta Supermarket. So now that's my go-to, with the ingredients that some I've never heard of, and others that I've been introduced to via these cooking demonstrations, which people have zoomed in from all over the United States and even in Mexico.
KPFK Los Angeles 90.7. We're speaking today with Abelardo de la Peña Jr., Director of Marketing and Communications for La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. So, Abelardo, what have you seen with regard to trends and what, let's say personally, my mother said, I'm not making tamales in my home, even though she later did it, but she did it herself, right? And normally it's the entire family going to my mother's. We all make the tamales. We all get our share. We move on. It's very communal, right? What have you seen? Are folks now, for instance, in my family, my wife, 3 daughters, and I, we made tamales ourselves with the Zoom instructions and the written instructions of my mother. Folks are making pozole. Some folks are making their own piñatas. What have you seen as a trend occurring within Chicano, Mexican, Latino LA that folks listening can say, hey, I'm doing that too? And also, where do I learn to make more? So what are some of the trends and how do they find out how to even become better cooks?
Sure, I see a couple. One is the use of masa. Masa, of course, the primary ingredient in tortillas and also tamales. But there's some of the other iterations of food that can be made with masa. Learning about masa, the nixtamalization, how masa is made, using, non-GMO corn, enmoladas, as I mentioned, the enfrijoladas, the empanadas. That's one that I think is we're seeing. The second, I would say, using the fresh ingredients. Let me backtrack. Another one is vegan, plant-based food. Getting the protein from plants and using those in your tacos, using those in your different dishes. Your chile rellenos. So that's a second trend, and of course being introduced to different Mexican herbs and spices. Beyond your chiles. So those are three that I think people are really paying attention to, learning from your tacos that use different ingredients than carne asada and pollo and al pastor, going beyond that. And people are exploring that, not just with our cooking demos, but also by LA Taco, the website, Savoir. LA Times has done an incredible job lately of really focusing on Mexican food. They recently did their top 101 restaurants, and I'd say more than about a quarter of them were Mexican or Latino restaurants.
So Abelardo, so the final question is, what should folks specifically do that could affect their families for generations? Let me give you the context of the question. So for the next likely 4 to 5 months, and I'm not a medical doctor, I'm just a political scientist and social worker, but for the next likely 4 to 5 months, a lot of us are going to be at home. And there's a lot of bad associated, the economics of what's occurring. There's all that. But how could folks, what specifically could they do at home to help learn more about their specific culture and really use these 4 months as a teaching, learning, listening experience that maybe wouldn't have occurred for 10, 15, 20 years, but seems to be kind of concentrated during these months? So give those folks some guidance.
Sure, I think you've already tapped into one of them. That Zoom call that you made with your mom to learn how to make tamales. Get in touch with your ancestors, with your moms, with your abuelas, if you're fortunate to still have them around, your tias or whoever has this knowledge, and you've always depended on to go visit and have these wonderful meals. Well, learn from them. Get the recipes. Have those Zoom instructions, or just have them write them down, or even record them on your phone. That will not only give you the food, but it also give you some family history, which is important. It's vital to learn about your family and how they interacted with this food, how it came about in their household. So that I think is primary. Second is share with them. Through my experience of going to Vallarta, I've been able to bring to my parents, 'cause I do visit them on occasion and try to keep a socially safe distance, ingredients that they've asked about. Do they sell this queso? Or do they sell this dulce? And so I'm able to now, by visiting and patronizing these specialty supermarkets and places to buy these ingredients, share them with people who would appreciate them, and learn about how to use them themselves, and then take advantage of all this virtually free content on the internet. Not only La Plaza, but there's others that are doing individual lessons. Food historian Maite Gomez Rejon, she does weekly Zoom sessions on a variety of techniques and foods. Lola's Cocina, who's been on our show as well on En Casa con La Plaza Cocina. And then just keep your eyes open, read, try these out. If you have time, try the things that take more time, and then once the pandemic opens, start exploring your neighborhoods. Places are popping up. I just read about a place called Nativo in Highland Park that does a combo of Italian and Mexican. Patronize the taco shops. Keep them going, and while the pandemic is still with us. So when we're able to move about and kind of resume our lives, they'll still be around. And then visit La Plaza, yeah.
Abelardo de la Pena, Jr., Director of Marketing Communications from La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to give listeners of KPFK?
One thing, a plug for La Plaza de Cultura y Artes. We are in the process of constructing a standalone gallery, teaching kitchen, and tiendita called La Plaza Cocina. It's located right across the street from our museum and cultural center on Spring Street in a newly developed area called La Plaza Village. It's going to incorporate everything that we've been doing at La Plaza, but in a specialty location that's going to have a huge comal, a teaching kitchen. It'll be open 5-6 days a week. It'll have these live demonstrations, and including these virtual sessions. But look for that coming up next year in the summer. La Plaza has, from its inception, it's really focused on One of its our focuses has been on Mexican cuisine, the finest cuisine in the world, through these cooking demonstrations, classes, tastings, and we will continue to do that.
Mr. De La Peña Jr., thank you very much. Un abrazo, and have a good, safe day.
Muchas gracias, Gabriel. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and to all the listeners out there, stay safe, stay well, and hopefully we'll see you out there soon.
Thank you, and we're out.
You're welcome.
This is Gabriel Buelna, your host, 90.7 FM, KPFK, Los Angeles. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back, listeners. This is Gabriel Buelna, KPFK Los Angeles, 90.7 FM. At We the Gente, we explore the diverse groups of our listener area, Los Angeles, and try and ask pertinent questions and hopefully guide further discussion and maybe help with some best practices or solutions on different topics. Next, we have a conversation with Dan Gold of the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. And we're going to have a discussion about the diverse Jewish communities here in Los Angeles and in Israel. And Dan will be going through that exploration and what it means as a leader and in building a culture and how COVID is developing that.
Passover started this past Wednesday for the Jewish community. These cherished days are going to look and feel different for the time being.
So in addition, we continue to have online our regular Shabbat services.
They told the families they were not allowed to come. They had to stay only a few people and be at a distance. So tragic. We belong to a community that thrives on physical proximity and constant interaction. At weddings, at bar mitzvahs, 3 times a day at the prayer. We go to the same kosher restaurants, the same grocery stores. Our kids go to the same schools. We all meet each other, know each other, and it's one interactive circle.
Your family very much wants to be with you in person. However, due to the current circumstances, it just isn't safe or allowed.
People can have a patient rep in the hospital call on the hotline and put the prayers on speaker right next to the people who pass away. When I'm seeing young people leaving behind 7 orphans, this is the hardest part. Just thinking about all the families who are being left behind.
The whole beauty of the Jewish tradition and religion is after a person passes, you're with your immediate family for 7 days, and hundreds of people from the community come and visit you and comfort you and bring you food. Suddenly that whole therapy, that whole ritual, that whole religious power of comfort, that is gone. They're locked alone with a video camera. I had to do Zoom Shiva calls. But this virus doesn't know race, it doesn't know religion, it doesn't know color, it doesn't know borders. And if we're not going to unite in force, it's going to take us all.
Dan Gold is with us today. So Dan Gold serves as the Vice President of Israel Education and Advocacy at the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. Dan received his master's degree in Middle East Studies from Ben Gurion University in Beersheba, Israel, and his BA from Tufts University in Boston. Dan worked in teen programming and Jewish summer camps. Dan is also trained in marketing, web design, graphic design, and consults with small businesses and nonprofits. Dan lives in Tarzana, California, with his wife Esti and their 3 kids, Shil, Itan, and Ite. Welcome, Mr. Gold. How are you doing today?
It's going great. Thanks so much for having me.
No problem. Part of the conversation today is exploring culture during this time of COVID, especially here in Los Angeles. And here in LA, we're a diverse region. I mean, we have
multiple Latino cultures, multiple Asian cultures. We have a large African American culture. We have a diverse European cultures, and we also have diverse religious cultures. And in discussing part of, I know Dan, we took a trip to Israel together, and I wanted to discuss one of the things that I found in the trip to Israel was, obviously the importance of culture and the building of society. Would you say we got that from the trip, Dan?
And I think anytime we have the great fortune of traveling with leaders such as yourselves to Israel, the goal is to show, that the region and that the country is certainly more complicated than it maybe seems in the news, and that Israel is like Los Angeles in many ways. We like to talk about the many faces of Israel, and that there's many different cultures, many different religious denominations, all being represented throughout Israeli society, and it is in some respects a nice microcosm for the entire Jewish people.
So one of the things when I went to Israel that I was shocked, and my colleague Andra Hoffman, who said, who I said, I'm looking forward to the food, and she said, well, Jewish American food and Israeli food is very different. Can you, I'm going to ask you a question that's probably one of the most complicated, but I'm going to ask you if you could take just a minute or two. For our listeners, can you tell us the three main branches of not Judaism, but from Reform to more Orthodox, just so we get a context for our listeners?
Absolutely. So when it comes to religion, you have within Judaism what is broadly considered to be the Orthodox Jewish community. And within the community, Orthodox typically means that it's somebody who follows all the Jewish laws very strictly. So it means they look at all the Jewish laws, and for those out there that don't know, there's actually 613 different Jewish laws that we're supposed to follow. And the Orthodox Jewish people will follow those laws very strictly every day of their lives, every ritual, from the New Year to how you eat your food every day. Then you have somewhat in the middle, so to speak, and I think the vast majority of Jews in America fall into either a conservative Jewish denomination or Reform, as you mentioned. Conservative, it gets a little technical, but conservative really means you believe in the law, but you don't necessarily always follow it. Whereas Reform Jews, which is a growing community, not just in America, but even in Europe, is really where they maybe question even the law itself, and they look at the scripture, the Torah, as we call it, as being more of as a suggestion, maybe not necessarily the word of God. And so you see that in America. In Israel, you see it more of a dichotomy. You're either what they call religious, where you follow the law, or you're secular, where you don't follow the law. And then just to your point of culture, I'll also just remind everybody that, within the Jewish people, we have a very, very clear divide, and it plays out in lots of fun and interesting ways within the Jewish people, between the two cultures of Ashkenazi Jews, which are Jews that come from the Ashkenaz or Europe, and then you have Sephardic, or maybe more broadly Mizrahi Jews, which are Jews that come from, Sephardic means Spanish, so this idea coming from the Spanish culture, whereas Mizrahi means East. So coming from Asia or Africa, and that's where you get your Moroccan Jews, your Tunisian Jews. And when Andra was referring to the food, the Sephardic culture really comes in heavy with really great food, whereas Ashkenazi Jewish, more American, is maybe less exciting in the cuisine.
Thank you very much for that. KPFK Los Angeles 90.7. We're speaking today with Dan Gold, who is the Vice President of Israel Education and Advocacy at the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. One of the experiences in visiting Israel was when we visited with the Ethiopian Jewish community and the different foods that were there and the experience and the conversation. So in having this conversation, I'm not sure folks or listeners kind of understand the diversity within various Jewish cultures. And as in earlier we had guests, in terms of the diverse Latino cultures and how folks just kind of put everyone in one basket, and it's it's actually very harmful. So in terms of Jewish society, one thing that I've learned is that the diversity is important to understand. That diversity is nothing that we should be ashamed or not proud, but really, celebrate. So with that being said, what effects, if any, is the pandemic having on Jewish culture here in LA or abroad, if you know, practices and traditions that really our listeners could say, maybe, yes, this is the direct causation with pandemic and culture in Jewish society?
I think that there have been some ways that all of us being relatively confined to our homes has enabled families to grow closer and to practice customs that maybe they didn't do themselves. The pandemic started right before one of our biggest holidays, the holiday of Passover, or as we say, Pesach, which is marked by, in America, two nights, two dinners where we have a booklet that we follow and we do all sorts of rituals to remember the time that the Jews were freed as slaves from Egypt. And certainly led by the prophet Moses out of Egypt and into the Promised Land. And so it's one of our most important holidays, and the pandemic came right before that, and we all were kind of stuck in our homes and trying to do Zoom when we could. So I think there have been some ways that we've come together as closer, smaller families, but I think overall the biggest challenge the pandemic has posed to the Jewish people and the Jewish community has been that we are such a community and such a religion marked by togetherness. So much of our rituals, so much of our celebrations are really about being together. And in fact, not just the big celebrations, but I mentioned before the commandments that we have, these 613 laws. Some of those laws actually dictate that we are supposed to be getting together to do certain things. Even our daily prayers are supposed to be together with a minimum of 10 people. So synagogues, big and small, are struggling because they can't encourage their members and their communities to come together, and it's been a real challenge. And then if you add on to the idea that I mentioned the Orthodox communities who follow these laws so strictly, some of the laws restrict using electricity on holidays and on the Sabbath, what we call Shabbat. And so you can imagine they can't even use Zoom, or they won't even want to use Zoom to try to connect with family members near and far. And it's been a real challenge. Life cycle events for the Jewish people are incredibly important, both celebratory and days of mourning. Funeral practices, I would say, have been a real struggle because there are some very specific ways the Jewish people are supposed to bury the dead and then be there for family and friends when somebody passes away. There's this week of what we call Shiva, where you actually are supposed to sit on the floor with your family member or with your friend to help comfort them in their period of mourning. And you cannot do that in the pandemic. And it's been incredibly challenging for Jewish people. It's been challenging for rabbis, our leaders who are trying to keep these rituals in our community united and together and keeping all those traditions going. And there's just been so many restrictions that it really has posed a challenge. And at the Jewish Federation, we have something called the Board of Rabbis, where we've really tried to support rabbis dealing with this. Even how, there have been weeks where things have changed. Okay, now we can have this many people at a funeral. Okay, now we can have, now we're limited to this. Things have changed so much too, so it's even keeping track of what is and isn't allowed. And then as you've seen, I think in the news, many of us have seen that some of the more Orthodox communities, for the most part, but really all denominations, some people just haven't wanted to follow the regulations, felt like it's more important to have a big wedding because in the Jewish community, this is one of the biggest celebrations you could have is when two families come together for a wedding. And so you've seen, whether it's in New York or I'm sure in Los Angeles and certainly in Israel, there have been these big weddings that have kind of violated protocol and have gotten people all upset because it led to spreading of the virus. And so it's been a real challenge, clearly, to say the least. And I think that's where the Jewish community is really trying to reinvent ourselves, really trying to stay strong and figure out how we can manage as the pandemic continues.
So in terms of Jewish leadership, do you think the pandemic is changing the way maybe those those decisions are made? Because the last time we saw something like this was the 1920s, and I'm not sure how many dissertations or theses have been done on decision making during that time period. So a lot of us are doing it on the fly. So have you seen the evolving kind of strategic planning and thinking among Jewish leaders in order to adapt, in order to be able to transmit Jewish culture to the next generation?
I think certainly when you look at the way the modern Jewish community is dealing with it, I can speak much more knowledgeable about what's happening in Los Angeles. You see synagogues that are, for the most part, these big buildings that have had, schools in them, and they have learning centers, and they have are merging. So they're realizing, maybe the big buildings aren't as necessary as they once were. We're reinventing what it means to be a physical community, even when you're not physically together. But what you're not seeing, and we won't see just because of the nature that it works, is the laws of the Jewish people obviously are not changing. So it's how do you maintain religious leadership without changing that? And I think one of the things you're seeing in Israel and in the United States is very high level rabbis, whether they're what we call ultra Orthodox or Hasidic or just modern Orthodox. You're seeing them be the ones to get the vaccine first. You're seeing them be the ones to tell the community not to have a wedding. And so you're really looking to the different, whether it's synagogue leaderships or rabbis, you're really looking and seeing people do their best to lead the community and be a role model for the right reasons. And yes, the community, as I mentioned, is adapting as best we can.
We're speaking today with Dan Gold, who is the Vice President of Israel Education and Advocacy at the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. The final question is: so, as a young Jewish father, 3 daughters, married in Los Angeles, how do you see? How have you seen this time period of where there is a lot of teaching, learning, and listening? How have you seen this time period to teach your children? And what are some of those lessons that you didn't even think were possible a year ago that you now know are possible?
Yeah, look, I think like all parents, of any religion, we're all figuring out how to keep our kids not just busy and living a regular life as much as they can, but like you said, trying to take it as an opportunity to learn. So, I think like a lot of people, we're going over the recipes of all the foods that we would cook. We just celebrated the holiday of Hanukkah, right? I think many people are familiar with Hanukkah because it comes in time for Christmas. So Hanukkah celebrates the miracle of the oil. Where the oil, when the temple was destroyed in the ancient city of Jerusalem, there's this something called the Ner Tamid, the light that's supposed to be lit forever to remind us of God's presence. And that light, when the temple went out, when the temple was destroyed, that light, of course, was out. And so the Jewish people found enough oil that they felt like maybe it would last a day, but the miracle is it lasted 8 days, which was long enough for them to produce more oil so that the light would continue. And so we cook things in oil. So there was a lot more of us cooking it at home with oil. Normally, you go to the bakery, you go to the supermarket, and you buy all those foods. But so there was a lot more of that, and hopefully, I think like a lot of people in a lot of communities, we're trying to make the best of it. And so that's what we're doing in our homes, and we're telling the stories more intimately amongst ourselves rather than going to the synagogue as much as we have in the past. It's been challenging, but I think there has been that opportunity as well. So we're the Jewish people. I think are in many ways like a lot of us here in Los Angeles, trying to keep our cultures and our rituals alive. Probably just doing so, in smaller groups in our own homes.
And we've been, listeners, talking to Dan Gold, who serves as the Vice President of Israel Education and Advocacy at the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, 90.7 FM, KPFK. Dan, you have the last word. What would you like to share with our listeners that you think, just as an Angelino, as a Jewish man, as a person who's a leader, that might be helpful to all Angelinos?
I think for me, really, the message is just looking at the strength of the community. The Jewish Federation has been around as a local organization in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles area, for over 110 years. And the strength of the community is really what's gotten the Jewish people through all tough times, whether they've been pandemics like this or whether they've been things that only the Jewish people have faced. And, when the pandemic struck, our federation really had to change how we serve our people and how we connect with other communities. As we remember, there was not just the pandemic, but then there's been racial unrest, and there's been a lot of things that have been happening throughout the country that the Jewish people are affected by, and in some respects, the Jewish people are trying to be helpful with. And so, I think the message that I have for everybody is really to look to the community, to strengthen the community, to be a part of a community, to be productive within a community, because that's really what's been the hallmark of the Jewish Federation. We look at the most vulnerable people in our community and in others and try to help. And we try to build bridges, such as the trip that we took to Israel, right? It's really about building a bridge from the Jewish people to other communities so that we learn from each other. We don't tell people, hey, this is who we are. We say, hey, come experience who we are. And I think that's really the message, whether it's now in the pandemic or hopefully soon when we're all back to a somewhat of a normal from what we were before. That's been, like I said, that's been the hallmark of the Jewish people and of our federation.
Dan Gold, thank you very much, and un abrazo, a hug from far. Have a good rest of your day, and be safe with you and your family.
Much appreciated.
So today, in episode 1 on COVID and culture, we listened to Abelardo de la Pena Jr. and Dan Gold. And as I mentioned at the beginning, please send me comments, questions, or suggestions at gabriel@wethegente.com. But what did Mr. de la Pena Jr. Get to? We had a discussion about how during this time period, culture is important in terms of teaching, learning, listening, and could be helpful in terms of teaching culture to societies. And as a region, how that will be helpful. In that discussion, I think, folks, you'll in our KPFK listeners, I think you'll find it helpful. And with Dan Gold, going outside of Latino culture into Jewish culture, had a discussion, was able to give the analysis of how individuals who are Jewish here in Los Angeles are experiencing COVID and some of the issues and problems and the reasons to go into different cultures is that we can see some similarities in how we're handling different situations and how we can learn from each other. And in that relationship of how we're learning with each other, we hopefully appreciate each other and help each other out. And during this time period where we can't meet and we can't interact one-on-one, if we can learn from using electronic means, using Zooms, using YouTube, or using this show, then we are better off as a gente. And as we the gente, we the people, it comes from that. So as we the gente, all the gente from Los Angeles, we can help each other and stay healthy and safe and build a better Los Angeles, a better California, a greater United States, and a greater world. Thank you, everyone, and be safe.